Welcome to FUZZFEED206. My name is Sergeant Sean Whitcomb, and I am also known as Vesper Bat here in Destiny the Game. So this episode is going to be a little on the heavier side because of recent incidents here in Seattle. So everyone who lives in Western Washington is very familiar with the incident that occurred this past Sunday. And of course, this is actually a conversation that is more of a national story too. And this has to do with the death of Charleena Lyles. So, where to begin? Charleena Lyles is a woman who was struggling with some mental health issues. She's also, it's been reported, pregnant, the mother of four, three children living with her. And we had dealt with her previously. And this was one of those situations where the officers who had previous dealings had to arrest her because of her behavior, presumably because of her mental illness. So starting from the beginning, or at least from the beginning that I'm familiar with, we had an incident that happened on June 5th. Police officers responded, and Charleena Lyles had possibly an episode or a break. She had made some very strange comments about her and her daughter turning into, morphing into wolves, had threatened police officers who had responded and saying they weren't going to leave alive. She had some large scissors or shears, but she was ultimately arrested and brought to King County Jail. And her kids were left with a family member. That incident was reported and referred to mental health court for further review. And fast forward to this weekend, fast forward to this Sunday morning when Charleena Lyles called in a burglary report. Now in Seattle, burglary reports are fairly common. We deal with about tens of thousands of those a year, and they're typically single incident or single officer responses to every incident. And what made this case unique was her recent history and the fact that we had documentation that she had threatened officers with a weapon and that she had some struggles with mental illness. So what is ordinarily a single officer response in this case became a two officer response. So two officers responded to her home early Sunday morning. They both discussed her recent history and talked about kind of a plan, discussed strategy for talking to her and taking the report. And ultimately, everyone we come into contact with, everyone we speak to during the course of our police services is treated with dignity and respect. And we owe that to everyone, and we certainly we're looking to provide that to Miss Lyles. So the officers went to the apartment, introduced themselves, spoke to Miss Lyles, began taking the police report were talking about things that had been stolen, and then something happened. And it happened within the span of seconds. We don't know, or I should say, I don't know. I'm not an investigator, so it's certainly not my case. I know the officers have been interviewed, but what we do know from the audio and the audio transcript that we released is that the situation had changed to a point where it had taken a 180-degree turn. You can hear it in the vocal inflections of the officers and also Charleena. And mere seconds later, after shots of get back, and instructions to tase her and call for help because she had knives, 2 knives, we know that our 2 officers used deadly force, and in the process, Charleena Lyles was killed. Tragically, we know that her 3 of her children were present with her, a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And even though this incident is just a few days removed, it still feels very raw. And I know that the men and women of the Seattle Police Department are certainly impacted by this because so many of us are parents. I know that the officers who were involved are deeply impacted, and our hearts go out to Charleena Lyles' family, and certainly, most of all, her children. So, this outcome is totally unacceptable. And, we feel that while we are obligated to performing a very thorough, detailed investigation into this incident through our force investigation team, somewhere, something, should have prevented this incident from happening in the first place. So the investigation is in full swing. We are underway with interviews. Our CSI team has collected evidence, has processed the apartment, and there's information that we'll be releasing in the coming days. Additional information we've already released is the audio of the incident. We've also released a transcript of that audio, a copy of the June 5th incident report detailing Charleena Lyles' arrest. We've also released the dash cam from the patrol cars. Even though the dash cam didn't really show anything, some of the questions that we had right at the outset implied that we'd cut some of the audio to eliminate some of the context. And that's simply not true. We did redact names, like our officers' names. Our officers' names have been released. We initially redacted Charleena Lyles' name, but her name is certainly public at this point. So that's all we redacted. And the dash cam, well, like I said, it just shows the officers walking up and talking. It contextualizes their presence there. It kind of refutes this other idea that some video that's been circulating on the internet was involved, because it wasn't. everything that we know we've released pretty much to this point. We've also released some hallway video that shows the officers approaching the door and going into the apartment. So that's kind of where we're at in the investigation. These investigations are absolutely comprehensive. It's a force investigation team investigation. I hate saying investigation twice in the same sentence, but there you have it. And these are some of our most elite detectives who will investigate force used by police officers. And so they're conducting their investigation, and all throughout we are still under a federal consent decree. So the Department of Justice, the federal court, and the monitoring team, of course, will be keeping a close eye too, just to make sure everything is as it should be. So the investigation will proceed. It usually takes, at the minimum, 90 days. And again, as information is available, as we are able to release it, we will. And that's our commitment for the duration of the investigation. Once the investigation is complete, it'll go to the Force Review Board. The Force Review Board is a separate process that will examine the force used, in this case, deadly force, and make recommendations as to whether or not everything was in policy. Questions that have come up are, why not less lethal? Why couldn't we have done anything short of deadly force in this situation, where you've got a person, armed with knives, and here you have police officers, and of course we're trained. I'm trained, but the training that we have is to ensure that we are protecting ourselves and others, and certainly having 3 small children in this apartment offers just an entirely new level of complexity. So, my goal here is just to kind of share, where we are in the investigation in a format that is different than what we've already posted on the SPD blotter or on Twitter or on our YouTube channel. Hopeful that I can just, take a moment to explain some of the nuances. And this is no different than what we would do for news reporters who've got these questions. So, here we are just cataloging it on this Twitch channel and our YouTube channel. So the investigators, of course, will ask questions about how the officers interacted with her, where they were standing, where the children were, what she did, what the officers did, how the officers reacted. All that's going to be reviewed. The less lethal that they had included pepper spray and batons. And like I said, tasers were not present. And by policy, everyone has to have one less lethal option on them. And less lethal is typically used in situations where it's practical. In a case where there's a question of deadly weapons being employed by the people we're talking to, it may still be appropriate for less lethal if there's a lethal cover or someone who's ready in case the less lethal does not work. So all of this, like I said, will be examined in absolutely comprehensive detail. And all those questions, I believe, have already been asked. So it's just a question of when that information will be made available to force review. And so force investigation team, again, we're looking at, I don't know, 90 days or so. And then force review board. And then the next step in this process is going to be an inquest. This is a in custody death, and the King County Prosecutor's Office and the King County Executive orders the inquest, the prosecutor fulfills it, and it's a general fact finding. And all the evidence will be examined, questions will be asked by an inquest jury as to what happened and whether or not the force was necessary, and to ensure everything that occurred was within the scope of the law. And I guess that's the real heavy part here, which is that, from what we know, which is, limited to what we've released, and certainly members of the department know more, members of the department who are intimately familiar with the investigation. Nothing, really offers any solace, considering the fact that this is an outcome that no one wanted, and certainly for a situation like this should not have happened. There seems to have been, I think, critical gaps leading up to, these responses that might have, had they been dealt with, led to a different outcome. And that obviously brings me to our, social safety net and the mental health system, which I think pretty much everyone, or most everyone, would agree is woefully underfunded. Putting it like this, you have a person who has a mental illness, who's pregnant, who is struggling with as I understand, a history of abuse, domestic abuse as a victim, who is working to raise 4 children, one of them just a toddler at age 1, one of them very small at age 4. And that is just a challenge that is hard for anyone. And to do that while struggling with, your own needs and your own illness and criminal justice requirements, going to court, dealing with all of that it just seems like it would be a tremendous burden for anyone. And so the question is, where could the system have filled these gaps? Where could Charleena Lyles have received more assistance, more help, and not be in a position where our officers are frantically calling for help and indicating that we have a woman armed with 2 knives, knowing full well that there's little kids in this apartment. So those are questions, and they're not easy questions. And I suspect that these are questions that are going to remain with us long after the investigation is complete. Because again, our investigation will focus on the police response. Our investigation will focus on the force choices and the ultimate outcome of that police response. And the questions that will remain are, whose responsibility was it to ensure that she had the case management, the support from the mental health system, support for housing, for medical care, support for her children? Those questions are much, much more difficult. And they, I think, weigh on everyone's mind. So I know that we as a department have taken great care to train in crisis intervention. One of the officers who was there was a crisis intervention officer who had reached a level of certification, which means he was something of an expert. The second officer also had training in crisis intervention. And so many of the calls that we deal with that involve people in crisis are resolved with no force, like 98% of them. And so it's, we actually deal with this quite frequently, like 10,000 calls annually in Seattle, people in crisis. And we are able to resolve those with a great deal of skill. And, the question remains, what could have been done for a different outcome on this one? And, here we are, a few days in, and knowing full well it's going to be, months before we can even, begin to unravel this particular, life story. And I just personally hope that we can do that in a way that's productive and meaningful. Some of the questions that we've had are about body cams. We've talked about body cams before on this feed, on this stream, and body cameras are very important to this conversation. Of course, we have the audio. The audio was linked to our in-car video. We've piloted body cams going back as far as 2014, but we're not currently using body cameras. So there's been a lot of discussions about the benefits and liabilities of body cameras, because we've heard that body cameras can be viewed as a tool for surveillance. Here in this case, body cameras might have offered a different perspective and perhaps a more clear lens as to what transpired. So I'm sure the conversation about body cameras will be one that will be ongoing in the weeks and months to come. And of course, less lethal will be examined. Like I said, our department has access to taser, batons, and pepper spray, and these are tools that we will certainly go out in the field with every day. One or all three of them, that's department policy. I think a question might be raised, would taser have been a better tool for this situation? Could that have provided a different outcome? Now, I will say this. I will say that we had a recent incident that happened downtown involving a young man who was suicidal, armed with a knife, uh, basically in the middle of the street, brandishing it, waving it, saying, "Kill me, kill me, kill me." And the first officers on scene tried to tase him, and they were not successful. The tasers that were deployed did not work. They did not subdue this young man with a knife. So I think that's pretty important to realize, that while tasers can certainly be very effective, they are not foolproof. And in the incident involving the young man, the first officers there were able to get to a position of safety, and they were able to ensure that the folks, the pedestrians nearby, were in a position of safety as well before they were able to back up and kind of create a perimeter and call in negotiators and additional officers, SWAT officers, and ultimately like a fence that kept this young man in this one block out of harm's way, and out of our way, keeping our folks safe. And so tasers didn't necessarily have the desired effect there. It might have been it wouldn't have been a standoff had they worked as we often hope they do. So it would be a little soon to say that this is a definitive solution. But again, on an incident like this where there's loss of life and an obligation to find answers, I think it's pretty fair to say that regardless of the efficacy, it's something that's going to be examined very, very closely. So, body cameras and less lethal, of course, the investigation proceeding as it does. And, we are a part of the community. So the impact of this incident of, Charleena's death is felt, keenly over here. And we can only commit that we're going to do our best to ensure that the investigation, provides those answers that, are within our power to provide, and that we will continue to be champions for modern 21st century policing with the best training and best equipment, to ensure that as we go out to very complex incidents and complex circumstances, that the people we deal with will have the best possible outcomes. I don't really have too much more to add on this stream. I would just say keep an eye on the SPD blotter, keep an eye on @SeattlePD on Twitter, and know that as additional information comes out, we'll go ahead and we'll make it available. And our commitment to getting to the truth, our commitment to supporting the community, supporting our officers who've been impacted, remains steadfast. I don't have any last words for this stream other than we'll be sure to provide any updates next week, should any be available, but this is certainly a major focus for the organization right now. So, very important. I wish everyone a very safe week. If there's any questions about this, reach out to us. We'll do our best to assist. And in the meantime, eyes up, Guardians.